Hey everyone, it's Peter Kirk from Rock Daydream Nation, and today I've got a very special guest. I've got John McCoy, bass player, composer, producer. You may know him from a band called Gillan, one of my favorite bands of all time. Mammoth, Samson, and Zebra with a double Z. How are you, John?
Hello there, Peter. How are you doing?
Doing well, doing well.
We're actually connected, finally.
Yeah, absolutely. The wonders of the internet. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't,
Yeah.
but we get there. We get there in the end. Hey, John, over the past 12 months, there's been a bit of reissue of a few albums that you were involved with, namely, I think the Gillan 7882 CD box set. And going back a
Right.
little bit further within the 12 months, not to forget McCoy, The Sound of Thunder. Is it gratifying for you that these albums get a re-release and find a new audience?
Sure, yeah. It's great to think that there's still interest out there and people are appreciating the albums again. Maybe they're appreciating them a little bit more. In retrospect, I listen to things now that I sort of discarded at the time, but now uh, appreciate what was happening. Yeah, I think it's great. Yeah, there's
Absolutely.
just there's generally a sort of resurgence of people appreciating rock music from back in those days. Maybe because there's not too much around to compare anymore.
Do you often go back and listen to these albums, or are you a once and done, moving forward, and don't really listen back to the old albums that much?
No, I don't listen to them that much anymore. Odd tracks I do. If people talk to me about certain tracks, I mean, there are so many. It's hard to listen to everything. And I like to move on with new ideas.
Yeah. When you do listen to a track here and there from the past, do you get super critical of, oh, I could have done this better, or this could have been arranged differently, or you just take it all in for what it, from as a
Well,
historical piece?
it is what it is. It's of that time. Um, but I have to say that I've never really been 100% happy with most of the albums that I've done. Probably from, I wish I'd had more time, or
Yep.
I wish I'd had less time. I wish the sound could have been better. That solo could have been great, and it wasn't. Just little things, really. But you always kind of criticize yourself more than anything for the mistakes that you made.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Gillan, because that's getting a lot of focus. And I can tell you that my circle of friends in YouTube world, um, we really hold those series of albums that you were a part of in very high regard. You joined the band in 1978. Can you explain to the folks at home how that actually came about? Did you know Ian Gillan prior to 1978?
Yeah, I knew Ian. I'd been in a band uh, previously. I was in a band that was signed to Purple Records, and we did a couple of support gigs to Purple. And I'd see Ian and the other guys in and out of the management office from time to time, but we weren't close friends at all. I mean, the only guy in Purple that I really got on with, or the guys, was Ian Pace and Richie Blackmore.
Right.
Um, but I was aware of him, and I hope he was aware of me. So after that, that was around sort of 73, and later in the 70s, I had my own band Zebra, and I know that Colin Towns and Ian were aware of that band and appreciated what we were doing. But as time progressed, and I got more into production and session work, I did a lot of work at Ian's Kingsway Recorders studio. And I think maybe the first time I was doing an album with Samson, an album called Survivors. And Colin was around at the time doing something else there. And I asked him if he'd do a couple of sessions for me. So Colin Towns came in on the Samson album and provided some fantastic keyboard work. And we became friends. I did a couple of sessions for him, and we'd see each other from time to time, probably in the studio, because I was kind of busy as a producer and session bass player. And then when the Ian Gillan band, IGB, kind of was falling apart, Colin invited me down to the Marquee to see the band, and they were a great band, great players. One of my heroes in the band was Johnny Gustafson, the bass player. But, as a fan of Deep Purple, IGB was not really what I wanted to see as a fan. Apart from musically, whatever, it just didn't do it for me. And then shortly after, Colin spoke to me and said, IGB's winding up, it's all over. Things have gone disastrously, big word, wrong. And it's all falling apart. We can't get arrested for a new record deal, which I found incredible at the time. What had happened with IGB is they'd gone to America and spent a lot of money. And like myself, a lot of the fans were kind of confused by that band, and they weren't getting what they expected from Ian Gillan, and they lost a lot of money consequently. Anyway, Colin told me that they couldn't get a record deal, the UK record deal, but they had a record company in Japan that wanted them to do an album. Would I be interested in doing that album with them, as a session player? And at the time, myself, Steve Bird, and Liam Janocki from my band Zebra, we were kind of the rhythm section that were booked for, getting the job done, doing a good job, and we worked well together. And Colin was aware of me and the other guys and asked if we'd do it. And so we did what's now known as the Japanese album, fairly quick time. And the record company liked what we'd done. And as Ian liked what we'd done, and he said, do you want to form a permanent band? We were all pretty busy at, doing various things, but I didn't have a second thought because, Ian was one of my heroes vocally. I just loved what he'd done, and I couldn't wait to say yes. And that's kind of where it started from. We were booked as session players for that album, but then asked to become a permanent band, and that's what we did. and that continued for a short time. Liam Janocki, the drummer, wasn't interested in being in the band permanently for his own reasons, which I won't share with you. But that continued for a short time, and then there was general sort of, how can I put it? Not disapproval, but not entirely happy with Steve Bird's guitar performance live. Steve was a kind of more of a jazz player than anything, coming from Zebra, which was a kind of jazz outfit. And we needed a guitar hero in the band. And I'd previously, a couple of years earlier, I'd been working in a band with Bernie Torme. And it occurred to me that he'd be ideal to replace Steve Bird. And so I organized some support gigs for Bernie's band and made sure that Ian watched Bernie. Obviously, I primed Bernie and said, make a good one, put on your best show because Ian's watching you. And it's like, oh, okay. Because Bernie didn't give a fuck. Oh, didn't care really. And he impressed Ian, and which I knew he would. And soon, we asked him to join Gillan, and Ian sat us all down, and we replaced the drummer
with Mick.
Pete Barnacle went, and although he'd done a good job, he did a Japanese tour with us. He was a good guy, but we brought in Mick Underwood, who was just incredible.
Yeah.
And it made sense. The lineup just made sense. It just fell into place. And Ian sat us all down, and I can see it now. We sat around on flight cases in the studio, and Ian said, this is the band, we put this together. And the big part of it was he said, everybody gets an equal share. We're all in this together.
Right.
You're struggling at the moment because he was suffering from the IGB disaster. And so it was pretty tough at the start, but I couldn't wait to get to work on it, and which is what we did. And then we recorded the Mr. Universe album, which is when the band first really took off.
Absolutely. And, got signed to Virgin Records. Richard Branson was the savior, wasn't he? Like a lot of record companies didn't want to have a bar to do with Ian, but Richard saw something, and it paid off, didn't it? Because you guys were starting to get some commercial traction. Mr. Universe sold pretty well.
It sold really well. But Richard Branson, I don't know him now. I never really knew him personally. But he was from that world of, when he started Virgin Records, people who had record companies back then, they got into it because they loved the music and they were prepared to invest in bands and who might not make it until the third or fourth album, but they support bands and they loved it for the music. It wasn't about business. It wasn't about money. And I think he did us a big favor. Thank you, sir.
Absolutely. Well, the Virgin label had a lot of what you would say a lot of new wave and a lot of pop acts. So he really took a bit of a punt on you guys because you were like a metal. But that's something I really want to talk about, and it's a point of contention about the sound of the band because the sound of your band was very loose, spontaneous, and they always seem to lump you with this category called the new wave of British heavy metal. Now, first question to you, John, is do you subscribe that there was an actual movement called the new wave of British heavy metal, or was just some journo that created this word and lumped all these bands in it? Because it covers bands like Motorhead and Venom and Def Leppard. It's like a motley crew of all these different sounds. Do you think there was actually a new wave of British heavy metal sound?
Well, yeah, apparently there was, but I don't think any of us realized it at the time. We were just doing
Yeah.
what we did. You know, at the time, anything that was called new wave of British heavy metal or new wobbum, as we say,
Yeah.
we thought of it as being young bands, you know, guys in the band, because let's face it, we were all, you know, the previous generation.
Mm.
You know, we'd been around playing music and making records for quite a time. So I don't know. We didn't really feel part of that.
Yeah.
We weren't really aware of it at the time.
Yeah. The thing that intrigues me is because a lot of the sounds of your band were a lot very kind of how I would say punkish. There was a bit of an energy about it that was different to a lot of other bands. Like you look at the
Yeah.
setup of the band, it's like Deep Purple. Got a guitarist, a keyboardist, the same sort of structure, but the sonically it's different. And I'm wondering, is that some sort of an influence that you may have brought in? Because I know that you like punk, and you did produce the first UK Subs album. We'll talk about that shortly. Is there? Do you think that's something that indirectly that you or maybe Colin brought into the band, listening to what was happening in the music world, like post-punk? Because there's a lot of energy, there's a lot of spikiness in a lot of those
Yeah.
early Gillan albums.
Yeah, I think I have to say, yeah, I'm guilty of that. And it was intentional because at the time there was a lot of rock bands that to me sounded like a little bit cabaret, you know. And having worked with punk bands and I mean also before Bernie came into the band, he had his band, the Bernie Torme band, which was kind of punk. And I wanted to, you know, capture the live atmosphere of the band, and none on those albums, you know, we didn't spend days and days getting the right take. It was probably the first or second take on all those tracks, as far as the backing tracks go.
Yeah.
There's a certain energy, you know, when you're recording that you put into something, and if one member or the producer or somebody turns around and said, no, that's not quite right, you know, it could have been better. So you do it again, but somehow you've lost that initial spark. And that's what, in my production input to the band, that's what I tried to do, was to capture that spark. And I think it worked. You know, Kingsway Recorders was a fairly basic studio. And we didn't have a lot of, you know, technological toys to play with. You know, it was just put it into record on tape and take it from there. And of course, I had a lot of help with engineer Chaz Watkins, who's a brilliant engineer at the time, and we worked well together. And I think it worked. I mean, it kind of changed as we got bigger and busier. It kind of changed over the years. I think by the time we got to the Magic album, the sound had diluted a bit. You know, it was a bit sweeter.
Yeah, a bit more commercial, bit smoother.
You know, yeah.
It's interesting about the punk bit or the new wave element that when Ian's been asked about this, he denies it. So
well, I don't think he was really aware. You know, he's a strange guy in that respect. He hears what he wants to hear, and
yeah, but unaware that you were bringing all these subservient influences into the band. But it works. It works.
You know, I virtually lived in the studio in those years. We'd stay there, you know, all the time and making the old studio work. You know, I don't think Ian really listened to a lot of the punk stuff at all. I think he found it it was kind of abrasive to him.
Yeah, but, he was listening to Elvis because he's a big Elvis fan, you know. Listening
well, of course, me too. I was a big Elvis.
That's all part of it. So just joining the dots, you've got this new wave punk influence. It sort of seems more logical that you're actually on the Virgin label because you look at their stable of artists, it seems that it's more of a perfect fit than you're on a Warner's or whatever other record labels that were at the time. So that's, I think Richard was probably happy that he signed this band and you were doing something that was kind of modern and very happening.
That was, the beauty of it was that we had freedom to do what we were doing.
Yeah.
There wasn't like an A&R guy hanging over us saying, hey, you can't do that, guys, you can't do this. In terms of musically, we were just allowed to do what we wanted to do. And they liked it anyway. So, and in terms of the whole concept of the band and the image of the band, the artwork that we did, and you know, it was kind of a lot freer than a lot of the bigger labels at the time, who were very controlling.
Yeah, absolutely. How serious was the push to break America in the Bernie years, or were you content just to conquer UK and Europe?
When we went to America, Virgin was still doing deals with American labels. I think some of it came out on RSO. There was an overhang from the IGB days. There wasn't big shows for us to do. It was kind of a club tour. And it was fairly disastrous, I have to say. I mean, we were booked into the worst possible places. They booked us into a gig in Nashville, and this was like yeehaw. And the stage had a cage around on the front, so that when they threw the glass bottles, it didn't hit the band. That's the kind of place we played.
I think I've seen that in a movie, John. That reminds me of the Blues Brothers.
Was real. It really happened. And during the tour, Bernie got pretty ill, and he wasn't, 100% fit. The only good gig, we did a New York gig, and Richard Branson came down, and the place was packed, and it was a good gig. But the rest of it was just like, no promoters would take Ian on because of disaster with IGB. Not disasters, but poor sales with IGB. And the promoters just weren't interested in Ian Gillan. And I think they kind of looked at the band and looked at the image and saw what the Americans thought as maybe a punk band, which they weren't interested in. And you know, the timing was kind of strange. I don't know what to say really, but we did it, but we never really broke America.
Yeah.
You know, we didn't have the big push that it needed, and like we needed to go over there and tour for a year or so, and you know, it just didn't happen. It just didn't happen.
Do you think on reflection that your sound was more attuned to what was happening in the UK? Because, as I said, it had that sort of spiky post-punk sound to it, and America was more AOR, more what Richie Blackmore was doing with Graham Bonnet, you know, the Joe Lynn Turner, the very smooth, radio-friendly. Maybe you weren't radio-friendly at that time.
Maybe not. You know, I really like Richie a lot, and I think what they did with Rainbow was fantastic. But it was radio friendly, as you say. But I mean, we were doing pretty well in the rest of the world.
Yes,
across Europe, we were touring constantly. I think 1981, 82, we played in 19 countries in one trip, you know.
Yeah.
We did a hell of a lot of touring, and we did it pretty well in most territories, yeah.
Now, you got more involved in the songwriting process from Glory Road. Was that something that you really enjoy, just getting involved in the songwriting process?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my strongest memories is a song that I wrote called No Easy Way.
Great song.
I can remember sitting in the control room when Ian was doing the vocal on that, and when it came to the middle section, the kind of softer section of that song, I was in tears. It was like, for me, you know, it really touched me because I'm sitting here, Ian Gillan singing my song. I mean, how good does it get? You know, I was so happy. You know, we wrote some good stuff together. And Ian was a fantastic songwriter. Another thing was a song called Mutually Assured Destruction. I remember the time that when we did that, I had the chorus of that song musically, and I was watching the news, and I said to Ian, "That's a great title for a song, you know, Mutually Assured Destruction. Mad. It's a perfect." And he, the next day, turned up with that song. From me saying MAD, Mutually Assured Destruction, is a great title.
Yeah.
He turned up with the lyric and was ready to go. The
guitar
some
line.
of the guitar line, like the verses, as I said, I already had the chorus anyway, and we recorded it, I think, the next day. It was fantastic. You know, he was a really good songwriter, and we clicked on so many songs. And of course, we had another brilliant songwriter in Colin Towns, which, you know, the band was full of songwriting talent.
Yeah, absolutely. Ian's lyrics were very sharp, and he was covering a lot of topics that you probably didn't cover in Deep Purple, a lot of social, political, tongue-in-cheek, like No Laughing in Heaven, which was one of the bigger hits for Gillan.
I mean, I came up with that idea. I spoke to Ian about it, and I said, you know, if you check out what's happening in America, when rap was just starting to take off back in those days, and I said, listen to this track, listen to this track. The guys are just basically speaking in rhythm. It's kind of attractive, you know, and he took that on board, I think, although he didn't want to listen to the whole thing. But and I had this bass riff, which I think I'd been listening to Tobacco Road by the Nashville Teens, and I was kind of bumming around on the riff and saying to Ian about the rap lyrics. And once again, a couple of days later, he turned up with this fantastic idea of No Laughing in Heaven. And it was a lot of fun. But the point is, at that time, Ian had freedom to do what he wanted. He didn't have management or record company telling him, you can't do that, you can't do this. He did what he wanted to do. And I'm just really happy to have worked with Ian when, for me, he was at his peak, creatively and vocally, definitely.
But you were sort of like the Trojan horse of introducing all these different musical elements, because I've often thought about that song that it's kind of he's riffing. It's like a rap riff, isn't it?
Yeah, that's absolutely right, and that's how it came about. Because you know, Ian, as you said, you know, Ian likes Elvis, and he doesn't kind of listen, or he didn't at that time listen to new stuff. I can remember saying to him, "You've got to hear this," and I played him "Brass in Pocket" by the Pretenders, Chrissy Hine. He just looked at me and said, "She can't sing." I said, "No, you're missing the point here." You know, he didn't accept new sounds or new ways of doing things at all. Very old-fashioned guy, you know, that way.
The great late Bernie Torme, what was he like? He seemed like a gypsy spirit. Is that the sort of guy he was?
You know, as I said, I'd worked with Bernie years before the Gillan band got together. He had a band at the time called Scrapyard, and I'd been recording and working with my band Zebra. We'd done pretty well, 3 albums, and I'd done albums with other people previously. And at the time, Zebra was kind of a jazz rock kind of band, and I was looking for something a bit more gritty, a bit more real. And I heard that Bernie, they were looking for a bass player. So I went round to the drummer's house in Wandsworth in London, and was met at the door by this stuttering Irishman. And we went into the front room, and there was a couple of Marshall stacks set up right there, you know. And we immediately started playing, just jamming. And he hit me like a ton of bricks. I thought, this guy deserves to be heard. He's very, very special. And we tried pretty hard with this band, Scrapyard, but it was kind of a 3-piece Cream Hendrix kind of band. We couldn't get arrested. And Bernie got together with some other guys and formed the Bernie Torme band, and they signed Jet Records, and but we kept in touch. You know, we were friends from that moment onwards, and I shared a lot of good times with him. You know, we were close. We were like family. I was the best man at his wedding, and
There you go.
I was at the hospital with him when his first son was born.
Mm.
We were very, very close, and I miss him terribly.
Yeah.
It's a big hole in my life. Yeah. You know, we always used to, when we were in the band, we used to joke about it. You know, we used to say, "Oh well, you're next." No, you're next. I mean, always expected to be the one that died, but it's horrible. It's a horrible feeling that he's not there anymore, because in so many ways he is still there. Because you know, on the internet, you know, Gillan videos and albums and the stuff that he did. I mean, I produced a lot of his solo work as well.
His music lives on forever.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, he's a very, very special player. And, you know, you can count, there are so many guitar players now that, and you can hear Bernie's influence hitting some of the young players. But he could do things that other players don't even understand. He had a fantastic control of the vibrato arm on the guitar, the tone of the guitar, the control of the feedback, the harmonics. He could just do some really special things. But I suppose we'll get together one day.
Can you explain why he left the band? Do you know why he left the band?
Yeah,
Gillan?
because he was being ripped off, as we all were, and sadly he found some concrete proof of it when we were on tour in Germany, and we'd been asking for accounts, and you know, we were pretty successful, and we were selling out tours all over the world, and we were still, all of us, still struggling, and you know, it was hard to understand why we weren't getting the rewards, and so Bernie did his own investigations and found out how much money we weren't getting, and confronted Ian with it and said, unless, you know, we get some accounts, I'm going. And Ian makes a big shout about, you know, it was something to do with Bernie not wanting to do a Top of the Pops show.
That's the question I was going to ask, because that's the
that's just absolute crap. You know, we were all ready to do anything with that band. We worked hard, and that was just a coincidental thing that we did have a day off coming up, and the opportunity was there to go on TV in the UK. Of course, you're going to say yes to it, but Bernie used it at that time. The previous show, he just said, you know, Ian, if I don't see the accounts and get explanations of what's happening, I'm going. And he got up the next morning and he went. And you know, it's so hard to explain, but people say to me, well, how come you didn't go? Well, I trusted Ian 100% from day one. I mean, I trusted him to stand by what he said. He wasn't going to rip us off. He was Ian Gillan. He was a millionaire. We went to shows in his Rolls Royce, for Christ's sake. And I can remember when Bernie left that morning, sitting down with Mick Underwood and talking to him about it. Well, Mick had known Ian the longest. Ian is Mick's daughter's godfather. Mick got Ian the gig in Deep Purple. They were very, very close old friends. They'd been in that band Episode 6 before. And Mick said to me, I don't know what's happening with Bernie. I don't know if it's right or wrong. But, Ian wouldn't do that to me. But unfortunately he did. And he did it to Colin as well, which is incredible considering that Colin had stuck by him all those years. It's very, very, very sad.
It is. Ian says that he was losing money. Can you rationalise how that could be possible if you're, selling out venues and?
Well, if the band was losing money, let's see the accounts. I started asking for the accounts in 1983. I still haven't seen them.
We'll get back to that. So Yannick Gears comes into the band. Was that a very quick process for them to select Yannick and get him into the band?
No, well, the day that Bernie drove off into the distance, Ian said, everything's okay, everybody's going to get paid, no problem, blah, blah. So we sat down round a table and started throwing names into the hat, basically, of who we could get to finish the tours, because we all felt that whatever happened with Bernie or whatever the situation was, we didn't want to let the fans down. The gigs were already booked and sold out. We wanted to finish that tour and get home. So it was a case of who do we get? And lots of names were thrown into the hat. And there were numerous reasons why certain people wouldn't fit. I can tell you some of the names, but I probably better not. The ones that are suggested. Yannick was a guitarist in a band called White Spirit, and earlier that, I think the year before or the same year, I'd been producing that band. I produced their first album, White Spirit. Great band. They were kind of a Deep Purple, almost not a tribute band. They did a couple of Purple numbers in there. And I got asked to produce their first album, which I did, and it went pretty well. And when we were discussing who could replace Bernie, I mean, there wasn't anybody that could replace Bernie, but Yannick was one of the names that I suggested because we'd worked together. He was a nice, easygoing guy, very talented player, and White Spirit had supported Gillan on tour. It was simply a phone call and he was ready to do it. We met up at the BBC studios when we went to do the Top of the Pops show, and I started teaching Yannick the various bits of the various songs, a lot of which he already knew because he was kind of a fan, and it was a different situation for him because he was brought in not as an equal member of the band, which he was more of kind of on a wage or a session man. I don't know what the arrangement for him
like a
was.
gun for hire type thing, was he?
Yeah, I don't know what the
Hmm.
arrangement for him was. He obviously was very pleased to do it.
Absolutely. So the album he did was Double Trouble. Firstly, who came up with the idea of doing one album of studio and one album of live?
Well, you know, because the live tapes were there, and it was a marketing ploy, really, because I did an arrangement of the old Elvis hit Trouble, and we'd had a reasonable hit in the UK with that song. And some bright spark said, oh, double album, Double Trouble, makes sense. It just kind of fell into place quite easily.
That album of there's a lot of songs on that album sound like it's getting more into a more radio friendly sort of realm, like Nightmare. And it's a bit of a head scratch because I think if that got released in America or got a big push, could have been a hit, because there's a lot of songs on that album that really sound like the sounds of that particular day. One thing I've noticed is it's around this time, and I think going into trouble, where Ian's having vocal issues. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah. He had a few problems, definitely.
Yeah.
And
because on that album, he really pushes his voice. Because I've noticed on the Double Trouble, especially the studio tracks, except for one, which is Sunbeam, every single song he goes into that big crescendo. And I'm just wondering, when he was doing, when you were doing the live show, were you noticing that he was belting it out and possibly contributing to this whole vocal issues? This might have been the start of it.
Yeah, it was, I don't know, a whole lot of reasons, you know, that his voice was suffering. It's probably from hard work, you know, to tour extensively like that, especially singing those kinds of songs where he did really push himself. It had to have an effect.
Yeah.
In the end of the day, you know, it apparently wasn't as bad as we were told.
So with the album Magic, I think you alluded to maybe the band's magic was not so magical. The chemistry was starting to evaporate on this album.
I don't know about that. You know, when we actually started the band, we all knew that Ian's first love was Deep Purple. And we all knew that at some point he may go back, he may get together with Deep Purple again. We'd have all, you know, encouraged that. I mean, me being a big Purple fan, we would have understood completely if he said, look, guys, I'm taking time to go and do a Purple album. No problem at all. It was kind of something that you expected to happen. But the negotiations were probably going on behind the scenes. As you say, during the Magic album. I don't know, you know, the passion sort of kind of disappeared, a certain feeling that it was kind of, it became just more AOR, run-of-the-mill kind of process.
So you had a feeling that something wasn't quite right.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it just run its course, or maybe we needed to take a break. You know, we all had offers of different work and things that we could have gone off and done. But basically, the way that it happened, Ian just ruined two of my favorite bands, Gillan and Black Sabbath. I I don't really like what he did with Sabbath.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you about that. Just one question about so with the band with Gillan and Magic, how did it actually dissolve? Was it like you did a gig and Ian said, "Look, we're having a break"? How did it sort of? Was there a conclusion? Did he have a conversation, or was it just left in the air? You just did a gig and that was it.
It was a real shocker, and it really hurts. Very disappointing that I started seeing flyers attached to the posters of the tour that, farewell tour. I said, what's this about farewell tour? And
Right.
Colin said, we're going to stop at the end of this. What? I mean, maybe I was on a different planet, but I wasn't really aware. I wasn't aware of what was happening. I must have seemed very naive. I think I was naive at the time because I did the whole thing because of music. I loved the music and I loved the band. But cut the story short, basically, we did the Wembley gig, and previously, the weeks leading up to that gig, the shows that we were doing, Ian was traveling separately, different hotels, and he had a bodyguard at the side of the stage, which I don't know what that meant. Why was that guy there? And at the end of the show, Wembley, Ian disappeared and left all of us saying, well, where's Ian? And he'd already left the building, as the saying goes. And the band and crew were left. I mean, the crew just were devastated and lost because they hadn't been paid. And I had to rent a van in the middle of the night and unload all my gear into it and get it out of Wembley. I mean, that was a pretty sad end.
Absolutely. Did you ever see him after? Is that the last time you ever saw Ian Gillan?
Yeah, that's the last time I ever spoke to him. Yeah.
Wow.
I saw him. I went to the management office, and he was there, and he disappeared out the back door, and I haven't seen him since.
Right.
We made a lot of efforts over the years to speak to him, discuss what's happening, but as I said, not at all. It's such a shame. It's so disappointing to. I'm sure that the fans that are listening to this find it incredible. Well, I do find it incredible also, because my hero let me down in the biggest possible way. We had fantastic success, but the results of that success are kept secret, and I lost a lot, and there you go. It's a sad ending to such a great band.
Absolutely. So none of the other band members, they were in the same boat as you. That was the last time they saw Ian Gillan when he left the stage at Wembley. That's it.
Yeah, well, I know that Yannick has done a couple of things and seen Ian, because, as I said, his involvement and arrangement was completely
different. He was probably oblivious to the machinations of what was happening.
Like the long-term members. I mean, I spoke to Colin Towns recently, and he still says he'll never, ever work with Ian again, which is so sad because they did some great songs, some great work together.
Yeah.
And, Colin, you know, is in the same boat.
Absolutely. So hypothetically, John, imagine you're in an airport lounge and you see Ian Gillan a couple of rows away. Would you go up to him and say something, or you just let it go?
I probably might say something, but I don't know what it would be.
Yeah, but you would go up to him and say something.
I doubt if I'd be able to reach him. He probably leaves the situation. If he saw me first, I think he doesn't want to answer the questions, which are still hanging in the air. It's so very, very sad. But what an amazing mess he managed to make.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, after Gillan, your musical career continues. So I'd like to ask you some questions around that, because you formed McCoy. Did you feel more freedom under the name of your band, or more pressure because you called it McCoy?
Well, the name, the McCoy band actually started back in 76, 77, when Bernie left Scrapyard to form his own band. I continued working with the drummer, Roger Hunt, because we found that if we called the band McCoy, promoters and people were aware of me from previous things that I'd done. So, I had a higher profile. So Roger suggested that he knew a great guitarist, vocalist, Paul Samson. And so that was the first incarnation of McCoy. But during that period, we changed the name to Samson because I was offered a lot of work, including doing the Japanese album with Ian and Colin. And of course, Paul Samson was understanding that I needed to step up the ladder and go to do that. So Samson was born and McCoy was finished at that time. The McCoy that happened in the 80s, after the breakup of the Gillan, I didn't do anything for over a year. I was suffering seriously from depression, I guess. And I just hid myself away on a little houseboat and turned off. I didn't want to do anything or play music at all. But I was encouraged to snap out of it, basically, by my wife, Linda, and friends. So I was very, very careful about organizing my own band, and chose to do it with people that I'd worked with previously that I kind of trusted because the effect that all that had, all the things with Ian had on me, was that I totally lost trust in anyone. So I wanted to be in a band with people that I previously worked with that I could trust. The only new guy to me was Ron Matthews, who had been in Iron Maiden, and the singer Tony T-Bone Reese had been in the band called Welcome, which was around 1969, 70, going back as far as that. And of course, Paul Samson on guitar, and Colin Towns played the keyboards. So it was kind of a group of friends more than anything. And we were managed by another friend, Kim Turner, who I'd worked with in a band years previously. You know, as I say, it was kind of a group of friends, and we went out under the McCoy banner.
So later in the 80s, you formed a group called Mammoth with Vinnie Reed, the drummer, guitarist Mac Baker, and Nicky, the great Nicky Moore, on the vocalist. Did 2 albums. Yeah. Beautiful, tasty, melodic rock, very much in tune with the sounds of the time.
My wife and I had known Nicky, who was then working with Samson, for many years. And we said, you know, this guy has got the best vocal you can imagine.
Great set of pipes.
He's never, ever made it. Why not? You know, and we came to the conclusion that he never made it because he was a fat person. And he didn't look good in the bands of the time, you know, the long hair, thin guitarist band. He just didn't fit. And my wife and I came up with the idea that let's make a band of fat guys around Nicky so he doesn't look out of place. The whole band is big and fat. So that's how the band Mammoth was formed. And Nicky and I wrote the songs not in a crass way, but in an intentional way to be commercial, to fit the commercial sound of the time. And it really worked. You know, we wrote some good songs, and Nicky is definitely in my top 5 vocalists that I've worked with and recorded with. I mean, he was just incredible. And, you know, he's another one of my friends that's now gone. You know, Nicky's gone, Paul Samson, Danny Torman. It's horrible, you know, to hear these guys that were so good and did so much. But Mammoth was, I kind of got carried away with it. The record company that signed us, we were signed to Zomba and Jive Records, and they picked up on the fat side of the image, and that's what became like part of the publicity machine around it. And it became kind of a joke band because look at these fat guys playing music, But in actual fact, the songs were serious, and so were we as musicians. And but we kind of got carried away on that sort of thing of going over the top, and spent a lot of money on huge stage sets, and then discovered that when we went on tour, we couldn't get the stage set into the gig. It wouldn't fit. I mean, we had a bass, we had a drum kit made with 7 bass drums. It was the bass drums that spelled out the name, you know. Bass drum, MMM. And so that spelled out Mammoth, and the kit was absolutely enormous. But as I said, the gigs that we were playing, we couldn't fit the damn thing into it. We had a back we had like a huge Mammoth head, which we couldn't fit into the gigs. I mean, it was just crazy. I think we took too many drugs, basically.
But yeah, I think that, it had a sense of humour about it that was decidedly British. And maybe
Yeah,
that didn't sort of translate across the Atlantic. And I mean, that comes
yeah,
across in a lot of bands to this very day, like bands like The Darkness. I think you guys were doing
yeah.
that sort of British humour before The Darkness.
It's funny, isn't it, that there's something that doesn't quite fit. You know, you got to be so careful with humor and rock music.
Mm,
There's some kind of barrier that it breaks down it, and people just don't accept it. Um,
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we trod a fine line in Gillan. There were humorous aspects to the band, but
Mm,
we managed to survive that, and people appreciated it. But as you say, it didn't cross the Atlantic at all. They just didn't get it. Um, I think Spinal Tap is one of the few situations where it worked. The humor worked, and that did pretty well. But the humor side of Mammoth kind of took over and
yeah,
made it too much of a joke, you know.
yeah. So if there was no videos and it was completely no visuals, people would listen to that album and think, wow, this is the Lost Journey album. Great.
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, the work on there, I'm very proud of it. What we did,
Mm,
Nicky's performance is the best that he's ever done,
yeah.
and Bernie Torme came in and did some guitar solos for us on that album.
Yeah.
Um, but it was a very expensive album to make, and it was made in a way that I wasn't entirely comfortable with. It was, we were signed with Zomba and Jive, and
Mm,
they had Def Leppard, and Def Leppard had famously spent, my God, months and months recording an album
mm,
with Mutt Lange, and they thought that that was the way that successful albums were recorded.
mm.
So we spent far too long on it, but it's a great album. And I think I came to the decision that, we had a great song called All the Days. And I, I wouldn't do a video of that song because I saw what was happening. Um, we did the Mammoth, the Fat Man video, which is the one you're talking about, right? The joke thing just took over, and it was a mistake to go in that jokey direction. So
Mm,
there wasn't a video for All the Days, and it gets a lot of attention as a song. Maybe you're right. The fact that it would have been better without video at all.
yeah, absolutely. One quick question before I ask the question about what you're currently up to. I just want to go back to your production work. So you did the production work for UK Subs, the first album. What was that like? Did you
That
enjoy
was
doing it? Did you enjoy doing that side of your career, the
I
production
loved
side?
it. I loved that. I loved that album. The guys had so much energy. They were nutters. But one of the songs, one of the hits, the single, was a song called Tomorrow's Girls. And I just played it yesterday and it still sounds great. Um, I managed to get a punk band to sound commercial. We crossed away from some of the punk bands that were around at that time were unlistenable for me. It's just like,
Mm,
please. but the guys in the UK subs could really play. They were great players. And Charlie Harper, God bless him, is still going.
Yeah.
He had a certain approach which put him above other punk band singers. So yeah, I really enjoyed that album, those sessions and singles that we did, and yeah, it was a good time.
Were there other punk bands in that era that you would have liked to have got your hands on, like bands like The Damned or something like that? Would you have liked to have got behind the controls?
I would have loved to have worked with The Damned. Rat Scabies was a fantastic drummer.
Oh, yeah. And he's back in the fold.
Yeah. We could have done some good stuff together. But sadly, I was committed 100% to Gillan. And I had major success abroad as well. I did some albums with a band called Rebra Chorba in the former Yugoslavia. And we did 3 #1 albums with them. I was busy as a producer, yeah. But my #1 commitment was to Gillan.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to fit in production jobs when we weren't touring.
So the little windows of opportunity, you're able to do stuff.
Yeah, and it doesn't always fit for other people's schedule.
John, what are you currently doing? What are you doing at the moment?
At the moment, I'm talking to some strange Australian guy who keeps asking me uncomfortable questions. I'm kind of taking it easy. I'm writing some songs, and I spent the last few years involved with my wife's antique business. I love old stuff, being an old person myself. I've always had an interest in antiques, and I got involved in that in the last few years, and it's very interesting. I mean, I'm just coasting along, I'm an old guy now, and I still wait for that phone call when if I get the right call and somebody asks nicely, or somebody presents me with something which I think is exciting, I'll be there. But I just continue to love music, basically.
Absolutely. Well, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. I'm a huge Gillan fan. I've always been an admirer of your work, and I have to say you're the most, I think everyone, when they look at that band, they always gravitate to you. And I don't know if it's the image or whatnot, but you're kind of the cult hero of that band, and that's a compliment indeed. And I think the music does live on, simply with the reissues and the remastering, and it's great to chat to you because you've filled in a lot of gaps.
Can I just say hello to my Australian, New Zealand friends, in particular, Ghost Train Head. How are you, mate?
All right. No worries. All the best.
Yeah. Okay, well, thanks. It was great to speak
to you. Thank you very much, John, and all the best to you. And, all the best. Thank you.